History is often written by the victors, but sometimes it is drawn by those who were forbidden from even entering the battlefield. In the middle of the 20th century, humanity stood on the precipice of the space age. We were preparing to launch rockets to the moon, to map the craters of a satellite nearly 240,000 miles away. We looked up with wonder, convinced that the greatest mysteries lay in the stars. But we were wrong. The greatest mystery was right here, beneath the waves that cover 70% of our own planet. And we were astonishingly arrogant about what we thought we knew. In the 1950s, the scientific consensus was as flat and featureless as the ocean floor was presumed to be. Ask any respectable geologist of the era what lay at the bottom of the Atlantic, and they would tell you it was a muddy, lifeless plain, a sediment-filled bathtub that had remained unchanged since the dawn of time. They believed the Earth was a static, immovable object. The idea that continents could move, continental drift, was treated with the same scientific seriousness as Bigfoot or telepathy. It was a fairy tale told by eccentrics, laughed out of lecture halls. The Earth was solid. It was fixed. That was the dogma. But there was a problem with how this knowledge was gathered. Geology was not just a science. It was a club, a specifically male club. The research vessels that zigzagged across the oceans, collecting the sonar data that would unlock the secrets of the deep, operated under an archaic maritime superstition. Women were bad luck on ships. They were banned. This meant that the person who would eventually interpret that data, the mind that would see what no man could, was physically barred from the scene of the discovery. Enter Marie Tharp. She wasn't an adventurer standing on the prow of a ship, salt spray on her face. She was a mathematician and a geologist confined to the basement of Columbia University's Lamont Geological Observatory. Her workspace was a cramped, cluttered room smelling of stale coffee and ink. While her male colleagues, like the charismatic and ambitious Bruce Heezen, were out on the high seas, acting the part of explorer scientists, Tharp was left behind to do the drudgery. She was what they called a computer, a human processor of data. Heezen would return from his voyages with rolls of paper tapes covered in sonar soundings, thousands of depth measurements pinged off the ocean floor. He dumped them on Tharp's desk and expected her to simply turn the numbers into a coherent picture. He saw her role as mechanical, a secretary of science. He didn't expect her to think. He certainly didn't expect her to challenge the fundamental laws of geology. But Marie Tharp saw the world differently. As she sat in that basement, plotting point after painstaking point, staring at the endless streams of data, she wasn't just drawing a map, she was visualizing a landscape that no human eye had ever seen. She was stripping away the water, mile by dark mile, to reveal the naked skin of the planet. And what she was beginning to see in the silence of her office was not a flat, muddy plain. It was something jagged, violent, and utterly impossible according to the men who signed her paycheck. The silence of the ocean floor was about to be broken, and the noise would start with a single, terrifying line drawn by a woman who wasn't supposed to be there.
The year was 1952. The Cold War was heating up, and the U.S. Navy was desperate for accurate maps of the ocean floor, not for scientific curiosity, but to hide submarines. This military funding kept the lights on in Marie Tharp's basement office. Day after day, she engaged in a task of mind-numbing repetition that required the precision of a surgeon. She took the sonar profiles, jagged lines representing depth, and translated them into a two-dimensional physiographic diagram. It was an act of translation, turning sound into sight. As Tharp sketched the North Atlantic, a pattern emerged from the chaos of ink and graphite. It was subtle at first, masked by the sheer vastness of the data gaps, but her hand felt the topography before her mind fully accepted it. In the center of the ocean, running north to south, lay a massive mountain range. We now know it as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge.
But Tharp saw something even more specific, something chilling. Running right down the spine of these underwater mountains was a deep, V-shaped notch, a rift valley. Tharp knew geology. She knew that a rift valley of this magnitude could only mean one thing. The Earth was pulling itself apart. The crust was splitting. New material was rising from the mantle. It was undeniable physical proof of continental drift, the very theory that had been ridiculed for decades. Alfred Wegener, the father of the theory, had been mocked into an early grave for suggesting it. And now, here was the smoking gun, hidden under 2 miles of sea warmer, revealed by a woman's pen. Excitement trembling in her hands, she called Bruce Heezen over to her desk. She showed him the rift. She pointed to the scar on Earth's face. "Look," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "This looks like continental drift to me." The room went silent. Heezen looked at the map. He looked at the V-shaped valley, and then he laughed. It wasn't a laugh of joy or discovery. It was the dismissive chuckle of a senior scientist correcting a naive student. He didn't just disagree with her interpretation, he insulted her intelligence. He told her that what she had drawn was impossible. It sounded too much like the scientific heresy of drifting continents. And then he delivered the line that would echo through history, a phrase that encapsulated the entire era's attitude toward women in science. "That," Heezen sneered, waving a hand over her months of meticulous work, "is just girl talk." Girl talk. He reduced the greatest geological discovery of the 20th century to gossip. He dismissed the tectonic engine of the planet as a feminine flight of fancy. He ordered her to erase it. He told her to go back to the data and recalculate, claiming she must have made an error, or worse, that she was letting her imagination run wild. Tharp was humiliated. The sting of the rejection was sharp, but the command to destroy her own work was worse. Yet she didn't storm out. She didn't quit. She returned to her desk. She took new rolls of paper. She started over. She replotted the sounding data, point by point, hoping, perhaps, that she was wrong, because being right meant fighting a war she wasn't armed for. But the math didn't care about Heezen's ego. The data didn't care about gender politics. Every time she drew the lines, the rift appeared. It was stubborn. It was real. It was waiting for them to stop laughing and start looking. For months, the stalemate continued in the cramped offices of Lamont. Tharp kept drawing the rift. Heezen kept denying it. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. But the universe has a way of conspiring with the truth. While Tharp was fighting her battle with the bathymetric data, another team in the same institution was working on a different project, mapping undersea earthquakes. They were plotting the epicenters of quakes across the Atlantic using a completely different data set. They weren't looking for mountains, they were looking for rumbles. One day, knowing the tension between Tharp and Heezen, a colleague decided to perform a simple experiment. He took the map of earthquake epicenters and laid it directly on top of Marie Tharp's Girl Talk map. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the ego of any man. The dots representing the earthquakes didn't scatter randomly. They lined up with terrifying precision inside the very rift valley Tharp had drawn. The V-shaped scar she had identified was literally where the Earth was cracking open. The earthquakes were the sound of the planet growing. Heezen stared at the light table. The correlation was absolute. There was no way to dismiss it as a sketching error or feminine intuition. The data from two different worlds had converged to tell one undeniable truth. He turned to Tharp. He didn't apologize. History rarely records the apologies of powerful men, but he conceded. "I don't believe in continental drift," he reportedly said, "but the map proves it." From that moment on, the narrative shifted. Heezen became the champion of the expanding Earth and later plate tectonics. He traveled the world giving lectures, accepting awards, and presenting the map. And Marie? She stayed in the background. When the famous World Ocean Floor Map was finally published by National Geographic in 1977, a map that hangs in classrooms and libraries all over the world, a map that changed how every human being visualizes their planet, it was a painting by Heinrich Baron, based entirely on Tharp's work. For decades, if you looked at the citations, you would see Heezen's name in bold. Marie Tharp was often listed as a research assistant or a co-author buried in the et al. The scientific community celebrated the man who collected the data, not the woman who understood it. It wasn't until the end of her life in the late 1990s that the world began to truly wake up to what she had done. Marie Tharp didn't just map the ocean floor. She proved that the Earth is alive. She proved that the ground beneath our feet is moving. She took the girl talk that her boss mocked and turned it into the foundational text of modern geology. She died in 2006, finally recognized as one of the greatest cartographers of the 20th century. But every time you look at a map of the world and see the ridges and rifts of the ocean floor, you aren't seeing a computer-generated image. You are seeing the hand-drawn legacy of the woman who saw the truth when the men around her were only looking for echoes.